Hi, my name is Susan. I run Susan's Pet Services here in St. Louis, Missouri. I do pet sitting and dog walking, and this is my video on why size matters in dog ownership. And excuse me looking off screen, I have my notes here. So the first reason is safety and handling. So I'm going to do this in two parts, the small dogs and the large dogs for this first point. So a lot of people don't realize just how frail certain small breeds can be, especially as puppies. If they get stepped on, it can break their foot. You can accidentally sit on them. I know this is a big thing with Chihuahua owners. You always check the blankets on the couch before you sit down. And then like something as simple as jumping off the furniture could injure legs or joints. So you have to sometimes accommodate with ramps, steps, things like that for getting on the bed or off the couch. It's just something you don't really think about. They can, if you trip over them, you and the dog can get injured because they like to be underfoot. And if you're going to have small children around the dogs, some children, if they're under a certain age, they might not understand how to be gentle with the animal, and they can accidentally injure the animal, especially with the toy breeds because they can be very fragile. This is same for if you have anyone who's elderly or unsteady on their feet around them. They could possibly trip on the dog, which isn't good for anyone involved. So you just have to kind of consider that if you're going to get a small breed. So the safety and handling for large breeds, you almost have the opposite problem where you kind of have the bull in the china shop effect. So if you have a lot of delicate collectibles, around, or you live in a small space, a large dog is probably going to run into and knock those over. Labs are especially notorious for their whip tails, just kind of going over and knocking everything off the tables, knocking over glasses. You can work around it, but you just have to be aware that you might have to put all your stuff in cabinets, keep the counters clear. A lot of large dogs like counter surfing because it's not that far away. And again, you have to consider interactions with children and the elderly. Small children might get knocked over. Even the best behaved dog will accidentally knock over a child at some point, especially, they're 70 pounds, the kid's only like 30 pounds. If they get really excited. So it's just something to consider. And the same is if you have anyone who's elderly or unsteady on their feet, a large dog, even if they brush against them, could throw them off balance. This is especially true if you have dogs that like to jump up. Even if it's okay if they jump up on you, what happens if you have a guest over and they try to jump up on the guest and knock them over? So it's just something to consider, like adjusting. You might have to adjust your space for a larger breed. And then another thing is the handling of a large breed when you aren't available. So even if you are, very active and strong and able to handle a pretty large breed, what happens if you're out of town or you're sick or injured? Who's going to take care of the animal? Who's going to be able to handle them? If you have to hire a dog walker, if a family member is going to help out. I do have some clients, their family members watching their dog, but they're unable to walk them, so they have to hire me in order to safely walk the dog. And that's just something to consider, is having a plan in place for situations like that. So the second thing to consider with the size of the dog is housing and traveling. So a lot of hotels will have like a weight limit on the dogs they allow overnight. Sometimes it's 50 pounds, sometimes it's 25 pounds. It really depends. So if you're going to be traveling with your dog and stopping somewhere overnight, where can you stay? So if you are someone who travels a lot, that's something to consider, especially for airline travel, because if you want the dog in the cabin with you, typically there's a certain carrier size. You have to have the dog under like 25 pounds. They have to fit in the carrier and be able to stand up. And then that carrier goes under the seat in front of you. So if you want to be able to fly with your dog and travel different places, how is a good consideration, because certain breeds will travel nicely in the carrier, and then certain ones you might have to drive everywhere, unless you want them in the cargo hold, which has its own risks. So that's something to consider. Then housing. So a lot of places that rent will have breed or size restrictions on what's allowed in, say, an apartment. So if you are in an apartment, even if it allows something, if you might have to move, it might be better to get a smaller breed because it gives you more options on where you can move in the future. Also, certain cities and homeowner associations will ban certain breeds. Typically, these are the large breeds that have a history of aggression with the breed. And so, if you're someone who has to move a lot, it's something to consider that, maybe you don't get one of those breeds because it'll be more difficult for you to find housing. The third thing to consider is care and feeding. So it costs a lot more to feed a large dog than it does a small dog. I know that seems really obvious, but I didn't really realize it until I got my own dogs, just how much, even 10 to 15 pounds more, how much food they consume. So that goes into your care per month. If you get things like dental treats, you're going to be paying a lot more for a lot fewer treats in order to keep your dog's teeth clean. The cost of supplies also goes up with the size of the dog. So you're going to pay a lot more for a dog bed or a crate or toys that are large enough for your large breed than you are for a small breed. And the same goes in for the cost of grooming. So if you have a breed that requires a lot of grooming, it takes longer to groom a large dog. So the cost of that service is going to go up the larger the animal. It's just something to consider. Do I have the budget to own a large breed? The fourth point is guests and emergency. And so this is when anyone's entering your home. Do you have the space to make a dog safe area? For example, if in an event of an emergency, say an evacuation, it's highly recommended the dogs are in these the large plastic crates for easy transport. Also, I personally recommend always crate training your dog, but that also stands if you have a large dog, where do you put the large crate? But that's especially important if you ever have to call EMS to your home, being able to secure the dog in the crate so that the emergency personnel can access you or your loved one. If you have guests and say you have a very nervous dog, can you create a space for them that's safe away from the guests so you can still socialize without putting your guests or the dog at risk? Or even just creating a safe space in the home where everything's pet proofed. Do you have room for that? And are you able to do that? And then the fifth and final point is vet care costs. A lot of people don't consider, and I didn't really realize this either, just how much vet care costs are linked to the size of the animal. And that's not because vets are biased against large dogs. Far from it. Some of them prefer the large breeds. It's more that the larger the animal, the more medicine they need. All the medicine is dosed per pound. So the anesthesia is also scaled by the size of the dog. So the cost can go up for any of the care. And this goes for preventative care too. I had 2 dogs in 2 different weight ranges, the 25 pound and under, and then the 25 pound to 40 pounds. And there was a significant price difference in those medicines based just on their weight. And I didn't really realize that until I had the side-by-side bills for their preventative medicine. And something else to consider is, can you safely hold your dog so that a vet or vet tech can work on your animal if they need medical care? If you have a very large breed and they're very nervous, are you able to hold their head or hold them securely to let a vet or a vet tech access the animal if they're injured? And it's just something to consider, because you want to be able to provide the animal proper medical care. And I know this seems like, oh man, a large dog's a lot more responsibility. Well, yes and no. Any animal is a lot of responsibility, but we want to be sure we can provide the best care possible for the animal. So it's just some things to consider.